As you can see from my drawing book here, my sketchbook, I use sketches like we learned in our first class to actually sort of plan out my studies, plan out our classroom activities, and some of the things we're going to be looking at. The next step we're going to look at after we did the lines is some cubes and spheres. And what I'd like you to do is take a pencil. Again, I like using these mechanical pencils because you don't have to sharpen them when you're outside someplace. And I don't use the eraser too much, but 'cause I think that's part of the magic is when you just draw and leave those lines. But on the lengthwise on your sketch pad, I'd like you to draw very lightly 3 cubes like this. Okay. They don't have to be really perfect, but remember our perspective. You know, this line goes off to a vanishing point like this. So these 3 cubes. And what we're going to do, we're going to practice looking at 3 different types of techniques in watercolor. The first one's called wet technique. Now the wet technique, I can use, just use actually my brush and just put down some water first. And just actually sort of put water in one of the boxes, let's say like that. Just fill it in, not real wet, but just get a little bit of water in there. And with the wet technique, what happens is we're going to just use black, then a little bit of color, and you'll find out how the black, or that water, the wet technique just sort of fills in that area that just has the water in it. And you go back and forth, and you can just fill it, just draw lines like this, and just fill it in, see that? But it gives you kind of an interesting, this little kind of a gradation effect. Fills in the whole thing, okay? Okay, now on the other side, we can do the same thing. So on the other side, rather than just put water in first, I just have a really wet brush. And you can even kind of organize your lines a little bit like that, but it gives this very interesting, sort of splotchy, but kind of this gradation kind of effect. Also, when you're doing wet things, you can actually tilt the paper and the pigment will actually sort of roll to one side or the other. You gotta be careful you don't want the water to run off your paper, but you can actually move the color around. So on the other side, I'll just take, again, a wet brush, very wet, and I'm not gonna try and go to the line, but I'm going to just fill in one side here. And what I'm going to try and do is make this side a little bit darker, because that's coming on my dark side. Now, as far as the top, I'm going to try and leave that fairly white. That's my highlight area. And I'm going to make this side a little darker. That's my shadow side. But you just sort of just fill it in. And again, if you don't put too much water on, you get this nice sort of, it can be a very even amount of color, or you can have it sort of splotchy. It has a sort of this activity to it, like the paint's moving around a little bit. So that's sort of the wet technique. Now, a dry technique is where I don't put the water down first, but I'm simply just painting with the paint. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually use our mixing tablet for this, because I want a little bit lighter on one side. So I'm going to put a little bit of water in here. I can check my color in my napkin here. Put a little more water here. So what I'm doing, I'm just taking the pigment down, saturating it with water, so it's not quite as dark. So in this one, there, see, I'm gonna fill this in like this. But I'm kind of looking for the texture of the paper a little bit. See that? So obviously by adding more water to my color, I actually get more, I get just a lighter version of that color. Okay, but I'm leaving sort of the paper come through. That's sort of a wet technique, that's sort of a dry technique, where you just sort of go back and forth and let the brush itself leave these techniques. It's sort of a quick technique, but we want this side to be a little darker than the other side. We may even let that dry and then go back over it. It's very quick. Let the texture of the paper come through. Okay, that's one way of looking at it. okay? Then on the last one, I'm gonna clean my brush. Again, here's my cleaning water. Again, go back over here, remember our brush, how about our brush habits? Just kind of let the brush sit here on the side, like that. And then I'm gonna take the flat brush, this one here, with the flat angle to it, a little bit of water. I'm gonna use this gray here that I already mixed up. And I'm just gonna stroke it in. Well, I get a little more wet than that, but I'm just gonna stroke it in this way. And add this in. That turned into sort of more of a wet technique than purely dry. But you can see by this nice gray. So you can see by the grays, the more water I used with the black, the lighter gray I got. Again, you don't have light gray watercolor or light blue. Oh, you do have light blue, but you don't have light black. You just simply add more water to it. So you want like a gray, you simply get this more gray tones. So we got lighter gray, got lightest light gray, dark over here. I'm gonna add a little more black, just a little bit. A little bit of texture to it. Yeah, and I tried to leave that little corner white because it kind of looks like a little highlight at the edge of the block. Okay, so I'm gonna let this dry, and then what I'm gonna do, again, take my brush, clean it up. And while those are drying, I'm gonna go back over here, and I'm gonna draw in a shadow. And we just draw the shadow in like this. It's flat and up the side of this one, this side here, little shadow. And so that shadow, again, the thing about watercolors, which is fun, is you gotta have some fun with it. That goes dark. But you see how I hold the brush, do the outside sometimes, and then come in to sort of fill it in. And you're done. A little shadow here. Here's that sort of that dry brush technique where I'm just sort of using like the edge of the brush doing this. See that? So you can use these brushes different ways. You got the tip you can push down on and just get a nice fine line, or you can sort of use the side of it like that and get kind of a nice, interesting texture. Okay, and then same thing over here. We'll just take this out here. And let's see, we got black. There we go. Now, if going up the side of the wall of this, I left that to the end because you don't want that necessarily to be as dark as the rest of it. So then I'll come back in with a little water and a little my dark here and just put a little bit there. And that sort of symbolizes that shadow going up the side of that other cube. I'll put a line down here. Let's see, it'll come up this way, do this. There, so you see the shadow now. But I'm thinking this should be a little darker, right? So it dried, it dries pretty quick. I just take another light bit of watercolor over the top of it like that, of the black. A little more gray, we got it mixed over, we had it, have it mixed in here a little bit. So just darken it in just a little bit. Let me just let it go. I like this little white sort of texture coming through, sort of like it has a back reflection to it. And we can even put a few lines here if we want. Again, I'm using sort of the gray, but now I'm using the point of the, see, I'm using the point of the brush. I'm gonna leave the top white because it's gonna be like a sheen. Now this is pretty good. This is actually, the lightest light, mid-range dark. This looks pretty good. This got a little dark. This looks like a black cube. So I'm gonna go with that. I'm gonna make it a black cube, except I'm gonna make kind of a shiny black cube. I'm just gonna draw lines on top of it like this. See, like that? So now you have this reflection of the top of this dark cube now. Even add a few more lines here. But again, you're still promoting the idea of this is a light area, mid-range, dark. And again, so we have sort of a full flood of water and paint. Here we just sort of a dry brush technique. And then of course on this last one, we used the flat brush, and we can get a little bit of a texture to it, which is kind of fun, okay? So we'll try that, and we'll see how you do, okay?